I think one of the biggest problems when I also talk to a lot of our clients who are engaged in either R&D or even clean dev, they today have access to a million AI tools. So the problem is not the lack of it. How does someone, like you or in your shoes, who's sort of planning a clinical trial, choose their stack today?
There's a lot of caution in biotech and pharma in the broader life sciences world about LLMs, about AI, and it stems a lot from regulations, compliance, and privacy.
Fair to say that if we find a way to optimize methodologies for CROs, if we find a way to integrate technology to make them better, that puts a much larger impact in the entire ecosystem.
There's this fear, I believe, that if we put technology in the picture, we're laying off a massive amount of the work.
We've had companies reduce clinical trial costs by, let's say, up to 25%. For trials that brings in so high numbers of investment, 25% is a big number. Where does that waste actually live? Like, does that live in people, process, decisions made too late? So welcome back to the best AI show on Pharma, the show where we cut through AI hype and talk about what actually works in drug development, clinical trials, commercialization, you name it. Today's guest is someone I've been wanting to bring on the show for a very long time because she doesn't just talk about fixing trials. She's usually the person brought in when things are already on fire. So I'm joined by Suzanne Vyvoda. Suzanne has spent over 20 years in clinical operations, working across clinical sites, CROs, biotech companies, from the seed stage startups to IPOs, the whole deal. She's built teams from scratch, scaled global trials across 40 plus countries, managed billion-dollar budgets, and helped companies cut trial costs by up to 25%. And without compromising quality or safety, obviously. She's also one of those rare people who can stay completely calm while everyone else is panicking. And I can say this because she sort of helps us as well in NRVIA in our own development, and which frankly is a superpower in clinical ops. I know, and she's sung karaoke in almost every continent except Antarctica. And as I've been told, she has had drinks with the Coldplay in Singapore. And we'll come to that. Suzanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I have to admit, not only is that the most thorough and accurate introduction I've gotten on a podcast, I really appreciate the detail there because I think that really does a good job of summing up my background, my history. So thank you for that. And yes, thank you for exposing some not so secret, but hidden aspects to my personality. You've done a good job kind of poking through my bio where I've hidden some of that information. And I tell you, I always give a lot of credit to the people that pull out those hidden details that I've placed there sort of strategically. So congrats on that. Yeah. What I'll add to that is I've spent the past 2 years really consulting into not only biopharma, but the broader life sciences ecosystem. And a lot of that lately has been focused on technology. What we've seen in the past couple of years, number one, on the biopharma side, is a real pivot from companies, with a lot of access to capital, big platform plays, a lot of different M&A deals to a much drier environment. I think we're seeing a lot of companies struggle to raise funds. We're seeing VCs, private equity, et cetera, raise the bar on what we see as an acceptable floor to bring a company under their wing. On the other hand, we're really seeing, I think, kind of a reckoning when it comes to technology. life sciences, in particular, clinical trials, clinical operations. The joke goes that we're operating off of technology that's decades old. And while that's a joke, and I absolutely say it that way, the reality is some of that's really accurate. We're using a lot of static tools and we're losing a lot of efficiency by doing so. I'll use, the classic example of passing an Excel tracker back and forth between site to CRO to sponsor, from CRA to CTM to PM. We're used to fragmented systems, and to some extent, we've really accepted the fact that that's how our ecosystem operates. One big reason that's the case is these companies are firewalls. We're used to partnerships with sponsors, CROs, sites, other specialty vendors. This is how our ecosystem works. But the reality is those are different companies, different operating models, different internal systems, software and otherwise. And those companies are protective of those systems. And I think this podcast are so interesting because we're seeing this technology boom. Now there's AI everywhere, and we're seeing software and hardware companies implementing AI at lightning speed. Now, life sciences is a really heavily regulated environment. We know that. We can't just throw AI at anything we want. That's not appropriate in this ecosystem, but it is an opportunity for us to think about how we use technology, whether it be AI enabled or not, to improve our workflows.
So, that's great. That's a great starting to the podcast. And you hit the nail right. And, I think one of the biggest problems when I also talk to a lot of our clients who are engaged in either R&D or even ClinDev, they today have access to 1 million AI tools, right? So the problem is not the lack of it. The problem is that it's too much, right? And you have the entire spectrum. You have the AI tools that automating a simple Excel file to the AI tools which actually, helps you discover a drug. So it's an entire spectrum, right? How does someone, like you or in your shoes who's sort of planning a clinical trial choose their stack today?
It's a really great question. And to be honest with you, I'll give you a fact that I think will help ground this conversation. Tech stack is something that we say in tech, in software. I got to tell you, I hadn't even heard that term until a couple of years back. That's meant to kind of give gravity to the fact that that's not something that translates really well into life sciences. And so the answer right now is there's a lot of caution in biotech and pharma, in the broader life sciences world about LLMs, about AI. And it stems a lot from regulations, compliance, and privacy. So there's this fear, what happens if I dump my IP, my intellectual property into ChatGPT? Or what if someone on my team does that? What are the consequences of that? Right now, these companies don't necessarily have sophisticated AI governance. They're still learning what AI can and cannot do. They're still learning what it can do compliantly and in line with regulations. And so the default for a lot of these companies, and I need to kind of separate small biotech from large pharma. I'd say large pharma is in this deep discovery phase because you're right. It can do a lot. Everything from helping with drug discovery to finding efficiency in clinical trials and commercialization. But what and how are very important. So what we see in large pharma are large teams of people that are trying to evaluate these tools and trying to implement them in different parts of their organizations. So they're deep in it. They understand that is where the world is moving. But if you come out of that ecosystem to a small biotech, say 5, 20, 100 people, you don't have the infrastructure to evaluate a tech stack. You might not even have someone to call. My classic example is, who do I call in IT if my laptop doesn't work? I'll just shut it down. I'll turn it back on, hope it works. I mean, these companies don't have infrastructure to support the discovery, the evaluation, the implementation of a lot of these tools. So the answer is a lot of them don't use them at all, or they're in the process of trying to kind of piece together, what's our biggest pain point? Where could we use something? And who do we trust that's made a product that we know is compliant from a regulatory perspective? So that compliance piece is important. And when I talk to a lot of AI tech founders that aren't familiar with life sciences, that can be a gap. That's one thing that if you're going to sell a product into a regulated industry, you're going to need to prove that it meets that standard burden. Life sciences, we talk about HIPAA, we talk about GDPR, but it's much, much deeper than that. And so if I'm evaluating a tool and I'm a small biotech, I want it to come with some kind of validation report that shows me how it meets 21 CFR Part 11, et cetera, because I don't have the leeway to make a mistake and bring on a product that's going to put my portfolio at risk. So the short answer is there's a lot of enthusiasm, but it's cautious enthusiasm. But what it really comes down to, in my opinion, is AI is not here to replace people. It has to be used with people, and with people that have good judgment in terms of what it can and can't do. So for example, I can ask AI to write me a report. I could ask it to write me a protocol. I could bring on a tool that's going to help me with site feasibility. But how do I know what it's giving me is really accurate, is really what I need? And that's where it gets tricky. And that's where leaders, they're reluctant because everything is riding on that capital raise that's enabling their clinical trial. And in life sciences, if we're going to go into the clinic, our raises, they're gigantic, right? We're talking about raising tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to enable these companies to go through the clinical trial process. And we don't have a lot of margin for error. And as you know, with clinical trials, we're talking about human beings. So there's already that margin for error. There's already that human element. We're not talking about building software or hardware where, if you build a process and constrain that process, yes, there are variables. Here we're talking about the treatment of human beings, and they just don't operate the same way. And so we have a long way to go as an industry in terms of how best to use this, where and how to use this, but more importantly, how to use this to bridge the gaps that we have between sponsors, CROs, vendors, sites, and ultimately patients. We say we build life sciences products, whether that be digital health, clinical trials, drugs, devices for patients. But is that really accurate? We're building them for capital markets. We're building them for M&A deals. We're building them for pharma. We're building them for the healthcare ecosystem. We're building them for doctors to have options for patients. So I think we have to be a little bit careful. It's not all or nothing, but the way that we start to see AI being pulled into life sciences has to be done with judgment and with discernment towards what it is that's being done, what it solves for, and making sure not to take that human element out of it.
So let me ask you this. To to give you a bit of a context, so there's a mad rush in India these days. India is sort of now this new GCC capital of the global life sciences.
Yeah.
So, I think about 30 of top 50 global life sciences companies are setting up their GCCs in the world, and the remaining countries are already thinking about it.
Yeah.
Right. And India has this huge talent pool. So let's say, someone today who have had an experience with companies like IQVIA, ZS, Accenture in India, gets out of his corporate job or her corporate job and sets up a startup with a bunch of similar folks from engineering, from clean dev, all of these backgrounds, and sets up a startup, right? With very fairly limited capital. And they want to create a vertical AI product that solves something for a global life sciences, right? What is your advice to that upcoming startup founder in India who's building vertical AI for the global life sciences? What is your advice for them, that the use case that they should be chasing? What's that one simple problem they should be solving?
So there's no one simple problem, but what I would say is, there's a ton of talent in India. There's a ton of people in India. I think what's important is recognizing within that startup what talent you have and what talent you don't have. And I think you and your company are a great example of that. Where do we need to augment our expertise with other people? And this is a great opportunity to exit India and bring in experts from other countries to really globalize that product so that it's not India-centric, so that it can be more globally centric. We know that the life sciences ecosystem is a very global place. Now, some of it is very US-centric. Some of it is very European-centric.
No, but my question is for someone sitting in India trying to make or solve a product for the US farmer. So what is that use case they should be solved?
And I'll repeat, there's no specific use case. If we talk about a minimum viable product, what we want to do is solve a problem. We want to remove friction from what's normally a manual process. And there's tons of ways a minimum viable product or an MVP can do that from a software perspective. But what I do think it really takes is ecosystem awareness and really deep understanding of what those problems are, who they impact. And by that, I mean, is it big pharma? Is it emerging biotech? Is it a CRO? Is it a lab vendor? Is it a discovery phase company? Is it late stage commercial? We've got to narrow down what that product is and who it's meant to help. What problem does it remove and for whom? Because what I see on my end is almost, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but what we don't want to do is throw spaghetti at the wall and hope that it solves a problem. We want to really understand the problem, who the problem impacts, and what those pain points are. And then we want to think about, is this a human capital constraint? Is this a financial constraint? What is the friction that this solution then helps? Those are two big, things that we see. And we see so many people involved in clinical trials, where we see clinical trials being incredibly expensive. We see high drug program failure rates. We see timelines that don't match up with original baselines. We see extension after extension, change order after change order. So there are a million problems that these companies can step in and solve. But you really have to understand the user and the use case in order to produce a product that's going to remove friction. And again, a minimum viable product may solve one micro piece of a problem. That doesn't mean that that company then can't build on module after module after a module, but you need some early adoption. You need to build relationships with folks in the US, especially if you're selling into the US market. You need to understand who they are. You need to have those folks backing you up, helping you come up with proof of concept use cases, et cetera, to really show that industry fluency. And that to me is the most important piece. What problem are you solving? Who are you selling it to? And what is going to make that sale successful?
So, I think you put it up fantastically well, and obviously, I mean, because it makes more sense because you've worked on all three sides of the spectrum. You've worked at the CROs, you've worked at sites, you've worked at biotech. Let me ask you this: with your experience of having a 360-degree view, is there any stakeholder that needs solutions more than the other?
That's a really, really good question. And the short answer is no. They all need different solutions. But I think the caveat to that is they need integrated solutions. We need to focus more on integrating a site experience with the CRO component, with the specialty vendors, your labs, your ePro devices, your imaging, with the sponsors. We need to find ways to use technology to unite those ecosystems. We're protective of APIs. We're protective of internally grown software. If we're a sponsor, a CRO, a vendor, that makes perfect sense. I'm not suggesting that everyone then has access to the exact same thing. Of course, there are pieces that are relevant to one organization or one vertical within that organization versus another. But I think the most important piece is to make sure there's transparency across all of these organizations, and integration. So, I talk to sites. Sites often have no idea what sponsors want because sponsors just keep flinging things across via email. We need this now. We need this now. What about this? What about that? My goodness, when does it end? And a CRO is a business, ultimately, and this is nothing against CROs. They're there to be that middleman. They're there to be that machine that can connect a sponsor, especially a small one, to sites. Yeah. But they have their own operating model. And frankly, their operating model isn't optimized to save a sponsor time, cost. They're there to basically execute on what the sponsor's asking. And the sponsor there holds the cards. They hold the budget. They hold the compound. They hold the intellectual property. But then they're sort of at the whim, often, if they don't structure things correctly with those relationships, CROs, vendors, sites, et cetera. What will happen? What will happen? What will happen will happen. And what we see is if everyone is not aligned around a common vision that's accepted not just at the operator level, but at the executive level, at the board level. If we're not all working towards one vision, one mission that is achievable, you have folks at different pressure points that are forcing a square peg into a round hole. And that's the kind of friction I'm interested in removing. And
so is it then fair to say, because you make a fascinating point. So, as you said, CROs are the middlemen, and it's obvious that they are sort of pressurized from both ends. Is that fair to say that if we find a way to optimize methodologies for CROs, if we find a way to integrate technology to make them better, that puts a much larger impact in the entire ecosystem?
I think that's a component. I think that may make a difference. And what I see a lot of the smaller to mid-sized CROs, they're doing exactly that. They are looking to layer on technology and integrations to compete with the giant CROs that are out there for business. That being said, there has to be incentive for those companies to change their operating model. And right now, there's this fear, I believe, that if we put technology in the picture, we're laying off a massive amount of the workforce. But again, what is technology without human input, human judgment, human discernment? We need humans in order to optimize technology. And so I think that's part of the puzzle, but I think it's broader than that. I think sites need to think about how they're operating. Sites are really reliant, though, on budget coming from CROs, from sponsors, et cetera. They're often really bottlenecked by resources. So we need to remove friction at sites to allow sites to do their jobs. You know, we look at clinical research coordinators, for example. They're running around all day long. I've been one with their hair on fire because they have so many different trials, so many different portals, so many different places they have to put things. And a lot of it's redundant. So if we start at the site, how do we make that experience more seamless so that they can focus on what they do best, treating and enrolling patients and making sure the patients get the best experience that they possibly can. Upstream from that, we have our CROs and all of our vendors. They have a part in that, but they're ultimately being contracted by a sponsor. And that sponsor can say, this is what I want to do. This is what I don't want to do. And that sponsor has a responsibility, even from a regulatory perspective. They own the trial. They're responsible for the overall conduct of the trial, for the actions of the CRO, for the actions of the site. And there's risk mitigation involved in that. How reliant can we be on tech if we don't know or trust the tech? How reliant can we be if we're turning over some of this responsibility to a CRO? Because do we know that that CRO is going to treat it the way that we would? And then downstream from that, what are sites going to do with this? Does it help? Does it hurt? And I think, again, that's where that ecosystem fluency is really, really important. Who are you building for? Are you building for a site? You still might be selling a product to a sponsor, but you might be selling it to a sponsor who can then work with sites and or CROs, vendors to streamline and optimize processes. So it's unfortunately clinical operations. My goodness, it's getting so far into the weeds. We know this. Yeah. And I know that the executive audience here, oh my gosh, trackers and templates and PDFs and Excel documents. And why is the timeline changing again? Why is there another change order? There's a lot more work that needs to be done up front to make sure that the trial that's scoped is the trial that's conducted. I think technology can play a role there. I think technology can play a role in the conduct of a clean trial. Again, aligning parties around the same metrics, the same data. What we often struggle with in clinical trials is there's no single source of truth. So if a CEO comes to me and says, how far off are we on budget? I have to check 3 different places and call 6 different people in order to answer that question. That shouldn't be the case. And my goodness, is that not frustrating for the CEO? If the board of directors asks, hey, this is our baseline timeline for this trial, are we going to meet it? I can't definitively sit there and look at one screen and say yes or no. I have to look at CRO inputs. I have to look at my own team's inputs. I have to look across a lot of different systems to be able to give concrete answers. And that doesn't empower pharma or biotech executive teams to make real world decisions. And that's part of the problem too. So yes, piecemeal solutions, they're going to help. But to be honest with you, the long-term reality is there's a lot more work to be done to integrate all of these pieces, all of these partners together. And they should be treated like partners. A CRO is not a vendor. They're your partner in that program.
So basically what you're saying is if we are to create this magical unicorn ecosystem of a single platform that is integrated equally well at all 3 levels, sites, CROs, biotechs, that's what the ultimate aim should be, rather than having these small piecemeal solutions at different places.
I love the idea, Ayush. I think, in my dream brain, or in my founder brain, if you want to call it that, I think there's a world somewhere in the future where something like that begins to exist. I don't think we're anywhere close to that yet.
Probably, yeah.
And if you or I went out and said, here it is, I'm not sure that the ecosystem would trust it. Because
wow, okay.
And I mean that because we're going from Excel to something that's so far advanced. I joke about wet ink signatures. I joke about fax machines. We're not really using fax machines, but my point is the technology that we're used to, that we're familiar with, that feels safe to us, is decades old at this point. I live right here in Silicon Valley, and my favorite cocktail party stories are, hey, what does everyone do for a living? Oh, I work in drug development. Oh my gosh, you must be sitting at the forefront of all of these incredible discoveries. And they're not.
Yes.
There are incredible medical and scientific discoveries happening all the time. And a lot of them are now being driven or assisted by AI. Those efficiencies are happening. But if you can't operationalize that science, that technology, you can't commercialize it, because we're still living in a world where burden of proof exists with preclinical trials, CMC manufacturing, clinical studies. I'm obviously making this very, very simplistic, but we don't just commercialize a product the way we do an iPhone. We can't.
Yeah.
And so I get these looks across these tables like, you got to be kidding me. You guys are emailing Excel trackers back and forth.
Yeah. I'm that by the way at the cocktail party.
Yeah.
Give me that look, because I remember when we started in Enroll, and I've been a healthcare business consultant all my life. But then when I started building technology and we started talking to pharma clients, we thought we are going to create the arc reactor of Iron Man, right? That level of technology, and we wanted to do that. And we started talking to the folks in pharma, and we asked, what do you want us to build? And the use cases they said, it just blew our mind. And we're like, you already don't have that?
Yeah.
You thought you must be using this for 10 years.
Yeah.
So,
very, very common response. Very common response. And so a lot of my consulting work these days is focused on orienting these tech companies towards what we're actually dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Because there are brilliant founders coming out of all of these amazing universities, these accelerator programs with really fantastic ideas and true passion to change the way we run clinical development, the way we conduct clinical trials. Their hearts are in the right place, and they're heading down great directions, but they need to be grounded in reality. And that's not just, here's your silver bullet, run with it. You're having to adopt to an industry that's just not there yet. Healthcare is another good example. EMRs, electronic medical records, this it's not that old. And if you go to a lot of local doctors' offices, you still see those paper charts. They're still there. We haven't even gotten away from that necessarily. But at the same time, we're asking medical practitioners, doctors, hospitals to adapt to all this technology without removing the friction that's causing that hesitancy. But what we're doing effectively is saying, use all of these extra tools and do all the work you're doing before. That's not how we're going to get technology adoption to move forward.
I'm saying, how do we remove that friction? If I have to ask you top 3 things I do to sort of educate someone or motivate someone to remove that friction.
So the first thing is you have to convince them that what they're doing is working in a compliant system, regulatory, really looking at patient safety, patient privacy, et cetera. That's a big piece of it. And number
That's
two,
number one.
you have to take work away. You're using tech to replace something, not add to it. So for example, I am not a medical practitioner, so I want to be careful, that I don't overprescribe here. But if I'm asking a doctor to see a patient, log a visit, make a note, log that into an AI component, I'm adding to their workflow, and then I'm taking away time from what they might be spending with a patient. If you take that back to biotech, same thing. You go to a CEO and you say, I have this amazing tool. It's going to make your life so much easier. ClinOps is going to love it. The CEO is going to say, I have a very limited budget. Why do I need another vendor? I have a team. I have a CRO. I'm not sure what this does for me. And I'm having to now invest additional capital in it. So from that perspective, what you have to do is you have to show them that there's real ROI in investing in a tool. This is how using this will save your team time, save your trial cost, reduce your human capital, the burden on your team, your human capital. It'll make their lives easier. It'll make your trial cheaper. It'll make your timelines easier to hold. You have to speak in language that they're going to understand, because ultimately those execs, most of them have not sat deep in clinical operations at a site, at a CRO, or at a sponsor. And they don't really care how the information gets to them, but they want accurate, real-time information. And they should. They should want that information. And this is where technology can help. But how do we implement it? How do we integrate it? And how do we package it in a way that, again, removes friction from these legacy systems?
All right. So let me take a segue, and and I need to ask this before we sort of move deeper into AI and the products that are just around the horizon. How does someone like you, who for all these years have worked in the so-called geeky, boring industry, get to have drinks with Coldplay?
Well, that's a great question. And it goes back to my geeky industry. I was in Singapore at an investigator meeting that I was hosting with a team. That clinical trial program that we were running was global, massive, more than 40 countries. So we were conducting investigator meetings all over the globe to make sure that we got a chance to meet those CRO counterparts, to present to the sites, to interact, etc. Singapore is a small place. There's not a lot to do in the evening. So we took, a bunch of us took a stroll down to the Marina Bay Sands. If you know the hotel, it's very obvious on the Singapore skyline. Looks like a boat supported by 3 pillars. You got to go there, right? Let's go down. Let's get a drink. Let's walk around the city. I think the best thing that you can do when you're on a work trip is still try to immerse yourself a bit in the environment, in the culture. At least that's my angle. I've been to so many countries, many of them, or even most of them for work. And I'm always trying to still get a feel for more than the airport, more than the hotel that I've.
More culture, food, people.
And the reality is they just happen to be there. So we happen to be at the right place at the right time, out in Singapore doing, operations work. And, that's it's a very short story, and it is a very big coincidence. But
it is. Oh,
there we went.
Yes. Yeah. People would die. See, this is what I say, and for everyone listening to this episode, this podcast, now you see our industry is not that boring, right?
Oh, I 100% agree, and I'll add to that. It depends on the team, and there are amazing teams out there, all with different interests. I've had the pleasure of working with some really cool teams when traveling. That we try the local food. We go sing karaoke in ridiculous bars. We get out there and walk the streets. We do touristy stuff. I love international travel, and I love what it exposes me to. And I don't want to be stuck in some sort of hotel, no matter how nice it is. I want to go there. I think that it's important that sponsors attend these meetings so that they can meet with the sites, that they can interact directly with the sites. There's a lot of tendency to outsource this to a CRO, to a meeting planner. Maybe one person from the sponsor shows up. My philosophy has always been show up, present, host those people, talk to them, interact with them. But then, it's this unique opportunity to experience a country or a culture you've maybe never seen before. And Singapore is really unique. It was my first time in Singapore. It's nothing like the US. I've been to India once as well. My goodness, culture shock. We hosted an investigator meeting there too, in Bangalore. And if you've not been to India, I need to go back because there's other stuff in India I haven't seen, Taj Mahal included. But if you don't go out and see and experience, and do so safely, do so in groups, there's standard safety rules that apply. But if you don't go out and try and experience, you don't randomly run into Coldplay at the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. I think that's the lesson here.
Let me tell you, because you talked about India, and you've obviously been in Bangalore. It's a beautiful city, south of India. Taj Mahal is north of India. I'm from near.
Unfortunately, it's not close. I looked into it.
Yeah, it is not close. It is not close. But let me tell you, I mean, India, and especially over the past few years, is not as difficult to walk around as it was probably 10 years back for foreign tourists. India is much, it has much better infrastructure. I mean, there are many more things for you to see in India now, to enjoy in India. And
Absolutely.
we'd like to welcome you one day. You talk about having drinks and dinners with different teams. So you have had drinks and dinners with teams from Biotech, from CROs. Scandal time now. So you need to tell me which team at a dinner party is fed up of which team the more. Biotech is fed up from CROs the more, or is it the other way around? Then who bitches about the other the most?
It's a great question, and it's one I'll take to my grave. But what I'll tell you is everyone has frustration points. And if you break out the wine and cocktails, those frustration points are going to bubble up. And they're all fair, they're all valid. And that's the main thing. Sites have reasons to be frustrated, real reasons to be frustrated with CROs, with vendors, with sponsors. CROs have real reasons to be frustrated with sponsors, with sites. And sponsors have real reasons to be frustrated with their partners. All of this stems from reality. Hey, we're all people. We're all trying to work towards the same goal. You might find that your CRO counterpart has the same affinity for the same glass of wine that you do, or love the same dish that you do. You order a bunch of food. This is a great way to break down barriers. And, COVID, of course, we were very sequestered to home, and we've gotten used to less travel, less personal interaction. And that's fine, because we can work this way. But I do think the old-fashioned way of sitting down, having a drink, maybe it's not alcoholic beverage, whatever you prefer, and talking, it humanizes the rest of that team. It makes you remember, my gosh, sometimes that CRO or that sponsor or whomever is frustrating, but we had so much fun sitting around a hotel bar, telling stories about whatever the case may be. All of a sudden we become human. And so I think those opportunities to interact with our counterparts at our partners in person, they're still really valuable. So, I mean, that's almost what I would pull from that. We should build partnerships. It's not you're my CRO, do what I want. I'm the boss. You're my partner. How do we accomplish XYZ?
So, I mean, working with all these stakeholders, and I spoke about this in your introduction as well. You have had companies reduce clinical trial costs by, let's say, up to 25%. Which honestly is amazing, right? For trials that brings in so high numbers of investment, 25% is a big number. So let's demystify this, right? Where does that waste actually live? Like, does that waste, let's call it 25% waste. So does that live in people, process, decisions made too late? So
all of the above. The short answer is all of the above. And I think there's one thing that I'd highlight here that's really, really important. When you scope your trial, when you go down the road of selecting vendors, CROs, partners that are going to support you during that trial, it's taking the time that you really need to evaluate those vendors, taking the time you really need to compare those vendors against each other and find the right partner, and then really diving in to the budget and contract. You need to understand what those documents say. There's a lot in there that can be repetitive, that can be unnecessary, that could be duplicative of what maybe your internal team can do. So I really encourage sponsors, whether that's full-time, fractional, or even a limited engagement, to bring on a senior level operator that can help dissect how to choose the right partner, how to structure a contract with the right partner, and the downstream impacts from that. So another piece, a standard CRO budget, you're paying the CRO as long as they're working for you. So if we want to talk economics, what motivation does that CRO have to bring in your trial early? Is there any? What if I build into that contract milestone payments if they achieve those milestones on time? What if I build in penalties if they don't? What if, another classic example is, I'm a small biotech. They're going to give me this amazing team during a bid defense, and it's a bait and switch. They're going to take that team off. What if I tell them that I won't hire them unless I get Joe, Bob, and Sue? And I want Joe, Bob, and Sue on my contract, on my team, named to my program for the duration of the trial. Now, if Joe, Bob, and Sue go and get other jobs, I can't control what they're going to do. But what variables in that contract can I control? A lot. And the problem with these CRO contracts is when you're evaluating them, they all have their own format. It's not apples to apples. Now, there are some really interesting tech tools that are coming out to help streamline this process. I will hint at that. I've been, speaking with some of these folks, and this is a really interesting direction to go in that's going to help feed through the noise. But ultimately, what you do is you take all of that, you try to standardize it into a spreadsheet, and then you go back and forth with those CROs and try to determine who's the right fit. It's not just the name. It's geography. Do you have people where I need them to be? Depending on the size of the trial, this may not be US or one country. It could be 12, it could be 20, it could be 50 countries. Do you have the regional expertise that I need, the regulatory expertise that I need? Maybe I don't have internal biostats or programming or data management. Do you have competent people in those areas to augment my team? Ultimately, it's getting to a contract that's fit for purpose. And it's making sure that contract is not bloated with a whole bunch of things that are not necessary. So it's not so much, I'll cut your budget by this percentage. It's, let me think about what you really need. Let's build a smart, data-driven, deliverable outcome related budget that's actually going to help you get where you need to go. And let's hold the CRO accountable for those deliverables.
So when you when you design this program, or when you design this plan, and let's say you're designing it today, and I'm sure today you will see a lot more AI powered platform options, that you can integrate in your program somewhere, right? And obviously there are going to be some platforms that you will see useful, and some, let's say, getting more enthusiastic. So where does AI genuinely help these clinical operations today, and where do you think it is still mostly high?
Look, the short answer is, does it save me time? Does it save me money? So if my trial is shorter, it's going to save me time, it's going to save me money. Those are the big drivers of this. So it may cost me more upfront, but if it is going to make me more efficient, if it is going to make me able to see my data or my metrics in real time, if it's going to remove friction from my team and make their jobs easier, those are things I'm going to look at. But again, it's not just throwing AI at the problem. What's the tool? Who uses it? How is it compliant with current regulations? I'm interested in trying some of these AI tools, but it's not a situation where I'm going to go, work with a biotech and I'm going to recommend 10 AI tools. I might recommend 1 or 2 that are really specific for that program, that use case, that therapy area, the size of the trial. I might look to the CRO to see what they're using, because that might be something native to them that they're used to using.
Right.
I'm looking for ways to increase visibility, reduce friction, and reduce burden on internal teams. And that's site CRO sponsored. I want to make the team's jobs easier. I also want to make transparency at the executive level easier.
Right.
So that's going to build confidence from the executive team in the tool, in the program, in the team. It's going to build confidence with the board, with investors, etc. But a lot of what you need proof of concepts. You need use cases. This is what my tool did in order to help this team. And you need to be able to speak to these teams in a way that translates, because ultimately your head of clinical operations may not be the decision maker to bring that tool on. They're still going to have to go to the CFO and say, I need more budget for this. And the CFO is still going to say, we don't have budget for that. You got to sell them on why more budget up front will relate to less budget on the back end. And I think the best AI companies are going to build that layer into their decks, into their arguments, in order to help build credibility.
Now, this is actually where it gets very interesting, because you're not just commenting on AI from the outside. You're also actually advising us on the development of our upcoming product.
That's true.
Which is being built on top of Komodo Health's real-world data ecosystem. So let me ask you this. What made this feel different enough for you to get involved hands-on? What gap do you see being solved for?
Great question. And that's a really simple answer to that. What I see here is the integration of real world data, real world evidence. And I think that's a very, very powerful layer to help sponsors and or CROs find patients and find sites. And I don't want to give away anything more about what you're building or what we're building. But I think that layer is often something that teams, especially small teams, don't have access to. They might be able to get some of that from their CRO. If they're big pharma, they're going to have a lot more historical information. But ultimately, trials need to find patients, and they need to find sites that are going to be able to access those patients. And so the real world evidence layer was very compelling to me. And what that enables is different than what a lot of other folks are doing. Now, there are a ton of interesting products out there. And I think I'm super excited to see how this develops, specifically, having been on the inside, working with you and your team is a unique perspective. I do this type of consulting work for many other teams that are also approaching different types of solutions. And yes, I want to engage with teams, number one, who are onto something, but number two, who are ecosystem aware. They know what they know. They don't know what they don't know. And they're willing to kind of go out there and seek that expertise that they don't have. So I think that piece shows a lot of awareness. We want to solve problems for clinical trials. We want to solve problems for life sciences. Here's where we're stuck. Does this resonate? Would this be a better fit for a CRO or for a sponsor? And the reality is it's different for big pharma than it is for mid-sized biotech, than it is for a scrappy team of 5. What they need is different. So it's not a one solution fits all situation. But I think the more data that we can provide to the decisions we make, the better we're going to do at moving things forward. So that's what's particularly interesting about this product.
So, I mean, I don't know if I've asked you this before in our conversations, but there is a shift in discourse that I now find in our industry. For years, real world evidence was mostly talked about in medical affairs or HEOR, but from a clinical operations lens, why does real world evidence suddenly matter a lot more now?
It's not that it suddenly matters more, but it's that for years we have struggled to find patients and find good recruiting sites.
Yes.
What we see is that when we go and scope a clinical trial, we often overestimate the number of sites we're going to need by as much as 30 to 50%, because the reality is some of those sites won't enroll. So the problem has become, how do we solve for that? How do we find the right sites with the right patients? Now, why not layer on actual evidence-based data that can help drive those decisions? The reality is our teams haven't necessarily had access to that. They don't necessarily know where to get access to that. And often it's firewalled behind very expensive consulting groups. Now, these consulting groups are often brought in when we want to commercialize a product. The reality is, by that point, those clinical trials, they're well underway. Many of them are complete. But the launch of a commercial product is such a big deal. The positioning of that product has to be data driven. I believe that if we use more data to drive our clinical trial processes, we're going to find more efficiency with finding sites and finding patients.
So, let me take this a step further because I'm just now curious. We're talking our product, and since you're also advising us on the development of it, I'm just curious to know what are sort of the more non-obvious operational questions you keep pushing the product to answer. So not the dashboards, not the sort of AI buzzwords, but the questions that actually decide whether a trial succeeds or fails. So what are those non-obvious, or are there any non-obvious operational questions that you sort of you keep pushing us to build?
Well, here's where I've been pushing. I need the tool to feel native to someone that works for a large pharma company, someone that works in small biotech, someone that works for a CRO. It needs to be universal language. And that has been something that's been important. It also has to follow operational logic. It may make sense to someone who's heavily involved in real world evidence, someone who's on, the post-market side, someone who's on the data management side. But this tool's being targeted towards teams that are operationalizing clinical trials. You need a UI and a UX that makes sense to them, to the user, or else You're going to have folks in there that are leaving you trouble tickets every 5 minutes because they don't understand what the steps are. So what I'm really pushing on is to make the language palatable to anyone that gets in to use it from your target market. I think that's been the most important thing. And beyond that, the flow of information. What is a minimum viable product? What are some downstream workflows that would enhance that product? And why are those friction points for teams?
Yeah. And, to be honest with you, when we first, got into the partnership with Komodo and we created a vision board of the product that we want to build, we decided to build the most advanced technology out there because we have this amazing set of proprietary data from Komodo. I mean, what can an AI startup, sort of ask for, right? And I remember, we wanted to solve the biggest of the problems, throw in the biggest models, design or sort of build our own models, create an agentic platform. And then we started talking to you and, our common friend, Mimi. And, every single time the feedback we got from you guys was humanize this, right?
Yeah. That's right.
And suddenly, now I'm so happy that, the product that is finally about to launch, that's a more human-centric or people-centric product, solving sort of real problems than just being focused on being cool.
That's so critical. And I know Mimi and I share that philosophy, and she comes from a very different background than me. But again, and we've talked about this along this journey, we're not taking humans out of the equation. We're not suggesting that CROs or sponsors, kill entire teams in favor of an AI agent. We're suggesting that these tools enhance workflows, remove friction, but that human element in life sciences is incredibly critical. And that discernment, that decision-making, that's what it's all about. And the ability to use a tool to decrease manual workflow is really, really impactful. But the person doesn't go away. And we are so far, far away from a person leaving the picture. Because again, we're so far behind in that technology. We want to make something that people are like, oh my gosh, this just made this process so much easier for me. I did it in half the time. Or I can see things now that I couldn't see before. Or now I have this whole team between clinical operations, program management, the executives, the CROs. They can all see the same tracker, the same movement of pieces in real time. It's to empower humans. It's not to replace humans. Yeah. And that to me has to be where we start. Now, that doesn't mean that this product doesn't advance over time. And it will, because we've already talked about additional modules we can build in. I think what we have here is a really great base that we'll build on. And what we've started to iterate on is nomenclature and a UX that's going to feel user-friendly to someone working in a CRO, in a sponsor, in a clinical operations environment. That, if we can ultimately bring it to a spot where we've reduced their effort, their stress, their reporting, their ability to translate to their executive team, that's going to be a very successful product.
Perfect. So, all right. You have a hard stop. Let me.
I apologize.
Ask you this. Oh, that's all right. Let me finally ask you this. You described yourself as a duck, sort of calm on the surface, chaos underneath, which is a fantastic way to describe oneself. As a duck, right? Let's ground this. So if there is a mid-sized biotech that asks you tomorrow, where does Alpha Dev fit into my setup, my internal team and my sites? How would you explain it in the most calm duck way possible?
Sure. So what I mean by the duck is I think leaders have to present a calm exterior. I think that we can be frantic under the water, and that's what that metaphor is meant to mean. But I think when it comes to Alpha Dev, what I'm looking to communicate in terms of value is make sure that you know where your ideal patients are. Where are they located? And then find sites that are located in those locations. This is as simple as matching sites to patients, looking at geographic heat maps to see where these patients are actually being treated, looking at sites that are in those locations. Now, there's so many more layers to it. We have to qualify those sites. We have to make sure that they have the right staff, the right equipment, the right experience, etc. But if we're looking for the patients rather than trying to get the sites to find the patients, we're now starting to layer in something interesting that we haven't had access to before. So it's Komodo, that factual, here are the patients with these diagnoses, and focusing our site ID efforts where we're going to find them. Now, this has work to do. This is US scale only. This is focused on a specific therapy area where the use case makes a lot of sense. I have so many ideas on how to expand it. But right now, it's giving more visibility to where the people that fit the trial actually live, actually are being treated, and building a site strategy around that.
Perfect. Suzanne, you've seen this industry from every angle, sort of chaos, scale, crisis, and now the next generation of AI-driven tools. And hence, because of that, I believe, this is one of the richest episodes that we have shot. So thank you so very much for your insights. I wish we had enough time to also have one karaoke session, which you supposedly are really good at. But then some other time. But thank you so much.
Absolutely. We'll do it another time. It's been a pleasure. Really, really appreciate the thoughtful conversation here and the back and forth. And it's a real pleasure to be here.